Okay, let's paint some trees, and I've chosen a very classic Australian bush scene with eucalyptus trees or gum trees as we call them here, but you can obviously choose any type of trees. Birch trees would work perfectly fine as well. Just finishing off my sketch here, and if you haven't heard that before, it's always good to use an odd number of elements like I've done here by choosing 3 trees. I'm using Winsor & Newton masking fluid. You can choose any kind of masking fluid, obviously, that you have. I don't use masking fluid that often in my paintings because I find it very hard to work with. It ruins the brush you're working with and it's very hard to clean, so I usually end up throwing out the brush and find another old brush. I prefer to paint around my subjects if I want to leave them white, but for this painting, because there's quite a bit of area to cover, I chose to go with masking fluid so that I can be quite free and liberal in how I paint the background. Alright, I'm going to mix a pretty bright and strong blue. It's a sunny day, and in Australia we have these really strong blue skies on clear summer days. But before I put the paint on, I'm just going to wet my paper. This will help with creating a more even wash. It also softens up the paper a bit, makes it a bit more receptive to the pigment. And then I'm going to create pretty much a graded wash. So darker at the top, lighter towards the horizon or the ground in this instant. And you can see that because I've got the masking fluid, I don't have to worry painting between the trees, because that can sometimes cause inconsistent backgrounds when you have to pick up the brush and skip over the tree and then fill in the gaps. This way I can paint back and forth in nice even strokes, almost like I would paint a wall or a door. Okay, I'm moving on to my green. Everything's quite bright and vibrant in this painting. It's not really how I paint most times. My colors are usually a bit more subdued and a bit more muted. But as I said, this is a bright sunny day in the height of summer, so all the colors are very vibrant. My sky hasn't dried yet. It's still quite wet. But I'm going to drop in those background trees now. And I want them to be quite soft. They're almost out of focus if we're thinking in terms of a photograph or a camera. So that's why I want them to be dropped in straight into the blue. But you could see that I mixed a very thick mix of paint. It doesn't have a lot of water in it. It's very strong pigment. That way it doesn't run too far while it still gives me soft edges. And because I covered the trees with masking fluid, I can be quite free again in how I move my brush around the page and paint that foliage behind the trees without having to worry too much about painting around the tree trunks. I've added a bit of ultramarine blue to that green mix so that I can drop in the shadows while it's still wet, so that everything diffuses and creates that soft, blurry background. For the ground, I'm using raw sienna and quinacridone gold. If you've not heard me talk about quinacridone gold before, it's one of my absolute favorite colors. So well suited to the Australian landscape because it is a yellow, but it's so vibrant, and as the name implies, it's gold. It's got this real glow to it. So anything that's warm, late afternoon sun, or anything you want to really jump off the page with warmth and strength, quinacridone gold is the right color. And it mixes beautiful greens as well when you add ultramarine blue or cobalt to it. Dropping in some burnt sienna now to start creating texture on the ground, even though that's going to be covered with a strong shadow later on. My background is starting to dry out, so I've just spritzed it a little bit and dropping in some further water droplets that will help me create some texture. I'll let that completely dry, so that's absolutely bone dry before I take off the masking fluid. I don't want it to smudge. And then I'm painting the shadow side of the trees first. Put down a cool blue-grey mix on the darker side of the tree, which is the right side. Sun coming in from the left. And as you can see, I've added in a couple of diagonals there, which is the shadow of the trees next to it, cast onto the tree trunk. And then mixed a very dark shadow mix and covered the entire ground. I'm pulling it up into the trees to connect them to the ground. And then I'm mixing a really strong and dark cool green to add in some foliage at the top. And I'm going to dry brush that in because the paint is really thick and I want to create lots of texture, create the illusion of leaves without having to paint each individual one. The aim really of this painting is to make those 3 white tree trunks pop off the page, so lots of contrast between the white of the tree trunks and everything else. And that's why I'm keeping those leaves dark and cool and in shadow, just to heighten that contrast. And I'm just going to add a few branches and twigs coming in just to create a bit more visual interest and some texture, and connect the trees with each other as well. Wiping out a little bit of the still wet shadow color on the ground just to create a bit of texture. Because it is the forest floor, there's always lots of leaves and branches and stuff lying around. The last bit I'm going to paint is some foreground bushes and shrubs, and I'm going to create some more of that dark green color similar to what's on the foliage there, and then using my calligraphy brush just to flick in a very uneven texture. It's always a risk that things are very symmetrical and same, so you've got to be careful to create enough interest and make it look organic and a bit random. And I've added a little bit more yellow into it just to create a bit of variation between the different greens that I'm popping in there in that foreground. Having a bit of fun with different types of brushes. Here popped up my fan brush, which is great for random organic textures such as grass and leaves. And that's exactly what I'm going to paint as the last bit of this painting. I just mixed a bit of yellow into white gouache so that it's opaque, and just adding a few highlights there. A few sparkles, the sunlight catching some leaves in the foreground. And because it's so much fun, I'm going to add a bit more on the trees and in the top part as well. And we're finished. I hope you enjoyed me painting these trees. Leave me a comment and would appreciate it if you could hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you're not already.